All right, now we're going to ask you to switch gears just a bit. We're going to ask you to start, there we go, thinking of the future. The future of engineering. And what we're going to try to do is get you to build on what you've seen over the past few days. We've seen some fantastic talk. There's clearly a huge amount of momentum going. Now is the time. Now is the time we can really make some progress in terms of implementing all the great ideas we have. But it's also a good time to start thinking about where it is we want to go. So that's where we came up with this idea of thinking about the engineer of 2050. This session is going to ask you to zoom out quite a bit and take a much more forward look. We believe that this is important for us as a community to do. It's important for SIA to do, to see where it is we're going and to take stock and see if we're on the right path. I personally believe we are, but there's many, many opportunities ahead. So we're going to try to guide you through a workshop and hopefully engage you in this idea of what we can do for engineering education in Canada. So, helping me today, we have Chirag and Peter, who are going to try to work and do a synthesis as we go through. We're going to be collecting information on a Google Doc, so the idea is hopefully everyone, somebody within the group of 3, has some sort of device. We would also encourage you to tweet as you go along. I'll have you know that there was an intervention that occurred during this conference. People taught me how to tweet. So we can have parallel discussions, but also there's a sheet of paper in front of you. And so if you'd like to take renderings of that, take a photograph, and tweet that as well, that's a second way we can communicate. We're very fortunate to have with us today Mark Abbott from the Engineering Change Lab. He's going to help co-facilitate this and bring in a very interesting, different perspective as well, as we try to put together an academic perspective in terms of a broader context. So I'll pass it over to Mark.
So before even talking about the agenda, I just wanted to share a quick story, and it's a story actually borrowed from a book called The Future of the Professions, which came out last fall. It's by Daniel and Richard Susskind. Quite an interesting book that's looking at some of these big broader trends, not just for the engineering profession, but for professions in general. And in the sort of the opening paragraphs of the book, they tell this story of a hardware company, a big hardware company, that famously brings all of its sort of middle management through the same leadership course. So everyone's assembled in a room like this for the first time from all over the country, and the very first slide of the very first day famously is an image like this. And they say to the assembled crowd of all of these key leaders who are showing up on day one, they say, could you please confirm that this is what we sell? And there's a bit of an awkward pause, everyone's just getting to know each other, no one wants to kind of speak up. And then finally someone says, yeah, that's our #1 seller by far, that's what we sell. And of course, this is all set up, and they quick flip to this slide and say, no, this is actually what our customers want. And your job is to find cheaper, better, more efficient ways to give them what they want. So the reason they started this book, The Future of the Professions, off with this story in particular, is they're talking about the tendency in systems, and in professions in particular, to kind of focus in on the drill and forget about the hole. To focus in on all of the different parts of the drill and optimizing them, and forget about the whole that the customer is kind of ultimately looking at. And so both are important, right? You need a well-functioning drill, you need a good product. But it needs to start with, what is that product ultimately going to serve? And so this session is about zooming out and looking at the whole. It's looking at what is the engineering as a system outputting to the world? What is it contributing to the world? And how do all the different components fit together to serve that, including engineering education, regulation, the way we work as engineers, the K-12 system that's feeding students into engineering. So in the beginning of this session, and I'll turn it over to Greg to go through the agenda, but basically the beginning is looking more at the whole, and then we shift into looking at the drill, in particular the engineering education portion of the drill.
Okay, so we're going to have 4 rounds of dialogue. We're going to get feedback at each point through, so there won't be a huge amount of talking here. This very much is a workshop, and we're looking for you to build ideas in your groups of 3, and then report them back at the end. The first one is going to be looking ahead to the future, to 2050. We deliberately picked a far enough future that we realize that none of us can predict it, and we don't want you to try. What we want you to think about is many, many possibilities. This is about divergent thinking. It's not about problem solving. It's not about coming up with a quick fix. It's coming up with many, many possibilities of the future. We're then going to look at, given all these possibilities, what might they have common in terms of engineering education? So what would be some of the common themes that we could put into this to put our students on a path? We're going to talk about that in 2 rounds, and then the last round is going to be, what do we want to do about it as a community? How might we want to take some next steps? So let me prime the thinking about engineering education just a second. Clearly, we are building off a workshop that went on 15 years ago, Engineer 2020. 2020 seemed like a long way away at that time. It's now only 3 years away, so it's really good time for us to take stock in how much progress have we made. What they did is they came up with 3 or 4 very interesting scenarios. So they tried to predict where we need to be and come up with the competencies that engineers would need to have. They came up with 2 very positive scenarios, one about really altering technologies and development. Then they came up with one, dramatic breakthroughs in biotechnology. All right, so there was dramatic breakthroughs in biotechnology, was the second, and there were 2 more bleak ones, one of a world full of natural disasters, and the third one, a world full of conflict and division. And it's kind of scary how close they got it. So if you haven't looked back at that and looked at the narratives at the end, they really did do a great job of predicting many things. They didn't predict the latest turmoil in the US, but in 2002, who really saw that one coming? So. One of the things they certainly emphasized, and this is the key point, was the increasing pace of change of technology in society and the idea that education, even back then, was lagging behind. So they said, does it serve the nation well to permit engineering profession and engineering education to lag behind technology society, especially as the technological change is occurring at a faster and faster pace? There's been many changes since then, but in my mind, I would say that's more true than ever now. The pace has picked up, and the question is, are we following suit? So the analogy I have is an elastic band on that one. We have technology and society racing ahead. We've got us in engineering education moving slowly. We're making good progress. We're not keeping pace. Raluca there can imagine what's going to happen. Will it be an evolution or a revolution? We don't know. But the question is this path sustainable? So now's a good time to take stock. And to do that, we are going to start by looking ahead. So I'll pass it back to Mark.
So when we were chatting about this session and the opportunity of this session, I understand that this is the largest CEA conference ever, and just thinking about all of the amazing wisdom that we represented in this room, as Greg alluded to, we really wanted to have this be a dialogue, a conversation where we could get ideas flowing and try to harvest something together. So we're going to do that through these 4 rounds of dialogue, and we wanted to get to the first round very quickly, just to see where kind of people are at, having been at the CEA conference with all of your sort of work in the space coming ahead, to ask a very big forward-looking question. What will society require from engineers in 2050 that is different today? So this is a question about the whole. What is it that engineers can, must, could contribute in the future? And so Greg's given a little bit of prompting here. And so what I'm going to do next is give everybody a minute or 2 of quiet, silent reflection on this on your own. And then you're going to have a chance for 7 or 8 minutes to discuss in small groups of 3 and have a dialogue on it. So the quiet reflection is for the introverts. If you're like an extrovert like me and it's getting really painful, I've got a timer here to make sure I don't shortchange it. But we're going to give people who want a little bit of time to reflect on this first. Now, I want to point out that this question is different than the one that engineers in general are kind of trained to think about, right? It's big and it's open and it's future focused. It's not like a problem we can dissect really easily and come back down to. Now, I think this room is obviously working in engineering education is different than the sort of that sort of average kind of exposure to this type of thinking the normal engineer. But if you are finding yourself a bit frustrated or uncomfortable in this type of open question, that's a good thing, that's a natural thing, and I encourage you just to dive in. So you might have some questions about what exactly the question means and everything, and I encourage you just to reflect for a couple of minutes quietly on your own and work with it, and then we'll give you a signal to transition into small group discussion in about a minute or about 2 minutes. So I hope that you're frustrated right now that I'm cutting this short because 7 or 8 minutes is not enough time, obviously, for this sort of question, but the good news is we are going to do another round on this exact same question shortly. So this was kind of priming the pump, getting the ideas flowing. You're going to have a chance to come back on this exact same question shortly. And before we do that, as Greg introduced me at the beginning, I have the privilege of serving as part of the Secretariat for something called the Engineering Change Lab. I'm not going to talk very much at all. I'll give you a minute on what the Engineering Change Lab is quickly, which is not sufficient to explain it. So if you're interested afterwards, engineeringchangelab.ca, or you can email me. My email's up there. But in general, the Engineering Change Lab was launched in January of 2015 as a collaborative platform to bring together a microcosm of the profession in Canada. So to bring together a microcosm of the drill, K-12, education, workplaces, regulation, advocacy bodies, civil society. So leaders representing organizations that together form a microcosm of the profession in the country. And there's quite a few universities involved, quite a few representatives from the lab in the room today. And so what the lab is all about is it's a structured process, ongoing process that brings this microcosm of people together to think about these big picture questions, about the whole questions, about the future and the big picture, and then to come back and consider the drill, consider all the parts of the engineering profession in totality, and sort of reflect on what are the changes that are required in our drill to meet society's needs, the whole. So it's a pretty unique structure for doing this that actually is getting some interest internationally from engineering in other countries. It's getting some interest from other professions because we're employing this change lab, social lab process, which is a whole big thing in itself, to a profession and the higher potential of a profession. So I should mention the leaders in the room, the organizations that are involved, all deserve credit, I would say, for expressing kind of a new type of leadership, where they're coming together to look at the greater good of the overall engineering, the engineering community. So, it sounds like fun, but it takes you away from sort of like what are my priorities of my organization? So it's really, these organizations deserve sort of our thanks for putting in that extra effort to convene like this and think about the big picture on all of our behalf and put in their time and effort. In particular, there's a group of champions that are involved. So the lab was originally co-convened by Engineers Canada and EWB, and since then Concordia and York University and Suncor Energy have formed a champions group whose responsibility is sort of to make sure the platform itself is available for so far there have been 65 organizations that have participated in a workshop and about 125 individuals from across the engineering community in Canada that have been involved from all of these different types of organizations. Some of them quite core organizations like our host today, U of T and iLead, has been involved for example, from the beginning and has been a real anchor of the lab. And I'm going to stop there because there's so many other amazing leaders who contribute in the room. I could take up the whole time just talking about that, but I encourage you to go on the website and learn more. So one thing I want to say is the lab is all about, the metaphor of a lab in this context is all about experimentation. We're actually interacting with the system on a tangible action level, and there's some initiatives of the lab are really getting traction now and even starting to hire staff to take them further. And it's also about this big picture thinking. And it's in an experimental mindset. So we're having dialogues like this is very much like a lab-like session, harvesting what comes out of it, and feeding forward so we can get kind of to deeper and deeper insights. So what I'm sharing today is really an attempt to take some of the wisdom from all of these leaders, all of these organizations. Part of my role is to try and synthesize that and offer it back in ways that are helpful. So I would say that anything you like about what I'm sharing as a provocation, you can attribute to that collective wisdom. Any deficits in that you can attribute to my my challenges in being able to synthesize that. So the convening question that the lab formed around is, what is the higher potential of engineering to contribute to society, and how can we unlock this potential? Big picture thinking, what is that higher potential? How do we actually unlock it? Tangible action and intervention. And so when you read that question, it sounds very similar to the question we just engaged around, right? And again, questions like this is how the lab actually considers these big picture questions going forward. And what we realized very early on is you can't answer this question by only looking within the engineering profession itself or the engineering community. You can't answer the question about the higher potential to contribute by only looking at the drill, right? So what I want to share with today, and this is kind of the bulk of the sort of the presentation portion of this, and it's still quite short, about 10, 15 minutes, and then we're going to get back to dialogue. So this is intended as a provocation, some thinking from the lab to help you kind of engage with the question that we just did again in a new way. And the provocation I want to share is actually not about engineering itself. It's about this broader frame. So what is the frame in which it makes sense to actually consider this question of the higher potential of engineering to contribute? And so I want to propose a frame that's been useful within the Engineering Change Lab in kind of getting us deeper on this question. And you may say, this is obvious, I've already been thinking this way. You may say, I've never really thought of it that way. You may disagree. All of those are great, and they're actually encouraged in the lab, they're encouraged in this room. It's a provocation to kind of help you engage with the question in a new way. So what is the frame we're proposing? Quite simply, the frame I'm proposing that it's useful to answer, to consider these questions of engineering's potential is the frame of the relationship between technology and society. And again, that might be so super obvious to a lot of people in the room, but what we've learned from our conversations in the lab is it's actually not trivial within the engineering community. A lot of people haven't spent a lot of time kind of thinking about, well, what is the relationship between these key things? So this graphic, which I've adapted from the Museum of Science in Boston, is one of the best kind of it's a simplification, but I think it's a useful simplification. So you have this concept of in the center, societal need. So somehow there's an expression of societal need that informs where scientists, so the oval is people, it's scientists, where scientists go to investigate the natural world, the physical world, the social world in the case of social science. So the science is based and rooted in the scientific method of observation or in methods of logic. So scientists take cues from society in terms of where they go to do their discovery, and they generate an output, a tangible output, which is scientific knowledge. It's captured in research papers and captured and communicated in different ways, which of course then informs society. Climate change is happening, here's how it's happening, all of these different things. A useful feedback and product of using that scientific knowledge to inform societal needs. Engineers, on the other hand, also are informed by societal needs. So what are the challenges that we need to solve? Oftentimes that's an economic imperative, a business imperative, a market imperative, or it could be a government, or it could be a grand challenge. And there's a lot of really interesting questions about the nature of that line of how engineering work is informed. So engineers take that societal need and they leverage a design process as a core process that takes the accumulated scientific knowledge and the new cutting edge scientific knowledge and brings it to bear on the societal need in order to create technologies. And I should say, in drawing on that accumulated scientific knowledge, sometimes that looks like the cutting edge discovery, and sometimes that looks like existing technologies that have already embodied past scientific discovery. So engineers are creating this thing called technology. And this is where I just want to spend a minute clarifying and making sure we're all using this word in the same way. Because what we've observed is people hear the word technology these days in very different ways. We're using it in a more fundamental sense here. Not technologies as the tech gadget that fits in your pocket, or just the artificial intelligence at the cutting edge of new technology, but in a more fundamental way as the products and processes in which humans adapt their environment to suit their needs. So it's a more fundamental definition. And so it's not just the cutting edge technology, it's any means in which humans adapt the natural environment to meet their needs. So a couple other kind of clarifications in here. And the role of engineers is not just the invention of brand new technologies. It's the application and the evolution and the customization of technologies to meet societal needs. So that's where the bulk of day-to-day engineering often happens. Another thing that makes this simplification in real life a little bit challenging is that although this is shown as engineers are the only one to create technologies, we know that's not true when we use this broad definition. And I think that's part of the reason it's actually hard to define engineering relative to other areas. And of course, just to close the loop, the technologies that are created don't only serve societal needs, they also create the tools for the next scientific discovery. So Galileo gets a lot of credit for his observations about the solar system and less for his developments in the technology of the telescope that actually allowed for that to happen. Right? So that might be trivial for some of you, and if it is, I apologize. But I actually think that the confusion within the engineering community, this is a provocation, is potentially both a symptom and a cause of us not living up to of the engineering community maybe not living up to its potential. So with that kind of basis, whether you fully subscribe to this way of thinking about it or not, we'll proceed and I'll share some thinking about this bigger frame of science and technology. So again, science and technology is not just the latest cutting edge tech. You can take the steam engine, the first industrial revolution that started in the early 1700s, which became the steam engine in the early 1800s. is serving a fundamental human need around mobility, right? And that was the technology of the day. That was the cutting edge technology. And you got the same concerns back then as you do in today's cutting edge technology. Is that safe? You want me to get off my horse and get on that? Right? I mean, it was like magic back then, right? And then that became in the second industrial revolution, which started in the early 1900s around electrification and mass production. What was the way that this problem was being solved then? You got diesel locomotives, you got electric locomotives, you got the next evolution of a new technological revolution upgrading and being fed back into how we're actually solving old problems. And of course that becomes the bullet trains and the high-speed trains starting in around the 1970s when the third industrial revolution was kicking off around automation and IT. And then today, a lot of people are arguing we're entering a fourth industrial revolution with new fundamental shifts in technology. And you have Elon Musk talking about hyperloops and new cases. So this is the sense in which we're using technology, not just the cutting edge, it's an evolution that's evolving with us as a society. So it's a quote from an economist: "We trust in nature, but we dream in technology." So what happens when you start to use this as the frame in which to consider engineering? It gets pretty exciting, right? Technology has been fundamental to human society since pretty much the beginning, right? If you've ever tried to talk to people about your work and how excited you are about the evolution of engineering at a dinner party, the odds are it was probably a little bit heavy lifting. However, if you talk about the future of technology and its impact on society, you know, there's sort of more of a natural energy in the general public around that conversation, right? And in fact, Hollywood, most of the movies of the future in Hollywood are set with this either as a theme or a strong backdrop of the future. It's just fundamental to who we are. It's fundamental to our future. It's a big, huge challenge. So if we dream in technology, let's take a second and actually dream about the nature of this relationship between society and technology. Let's dream of a world where society's informed and intentional relationship with technology benefits all of humanity, increasing the quality of human life and contributing to a more fair and sustainable world. So like any one of these sort of forward-looking statements, I would imagine everyone in the room would generally ascribe. You might have some wordsmithing or some things you think are more important or later, but I think this is a dream that we could all kind of generally support. And so a question is, how are we doing on that dream? What's the kind of current state of this technology and society frame? What's going on inside it? And here I want to reference some thinking that's coming out of, again, of the World Economic Forum. And so the World Economic Forum is proposing that we may be entering a fourth industrial revolution that's substantively different than previous industrial revolutions. And they say we stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another. In its scale, scope, and complexity, the transformation will be like anything humankind has experienced before. So think about those past industrial revolutions and how much they changed everything. What they're saying is this one's going to be even bigger and more impactful and fast-paced. And it's not just the World Economic Forum. You can look at writers and thinkers like Ray Kurzweil, The Singularity is Near, or Thomas Friedman talking about the age of acceleration. There's more and more thinkers that are talking about a fundamental shift in the relationship in technology and society. A fundamental shift in the frame that we're proposing is a good one to consider the contribution of engineering. So the questions that are coming up for society to focus is this tidal wave, this momentum that's being generated with this technological revolution will take us closer to this dream, or will take us away from it. Will take us towards the nightmare scenario, which is the mirror opposite. Or where will it take us in between? So how are we going to answer these questions about which way we're going to go when it comes to sustainability? You know, we have the fracking field versus the solar, but it's not this binary, and engineers know that. You know, there are environmental consequences to renewable energies too, the current technologies, right? And it's not just economic devastation you have to consider. There are the complex interactions around society and economy. How will technology either accelerate or support or even hinder a shift towards a more sustainable future? This is a question that has not yet been answered. In terms of our well-being, you know, technology we've seen, we know this has the power to connect us and unite us as a people, or to drive us apart and alienate us. We're seeing both the dream and the nightmare unveiling at the same time. You know, when you think of it from sort of a health and wellness point of view, will the artificial intelligence of the robot technologies be focused on doing better war or better caregiving, right? And if you look at it from a fairness and equity point of view, are the technologies we're going to generate increase an inequality gap? And this is obviously an image of rare mineral mining in the Congo versus social media and the benefits that are accruing to sort of the developed world. So we could go on and on and on with examples of this, but we know this as engineers, we know this as humans, that technology has massive power and technology can take us towards the dream or towards the nightmare. So how is society currently managing this relationship? And again, we're still at the society level, we're still in the bigger frame. And so you can think of it in different ways, and I like cartoons like this because they're humor-based or insights and truths that we actually know. So one way that society is kind of setting up now is with fear. My job's going to get disrupted, my privacy is under assault, all of these different things. And I just want to can't we just stop this train? Can't we just slow it down? And there aren't very many realistic scenarios at the moment where technology is going to slow down no matter what happens. I would provoke. Another way that people react is with blind faith. Don't worry, technology will solve it. We can just keep going the way we are and we'll figure it out later, right? Another is we have our blind faith in the invisible market. Right? The invisible hand of the market. Don't worry, the market will kind of correct and society will eventually, our needs will kind of come up. But we've seen lots of examples of market failures. They're established in the literature, and we've seen, again, examples that are unfolding right now where the market is not necessarily doing the greatest job of taking us towards the dream when it comes to the evolution of technology. All of this points to the technology bus is accelerating. And governments are struggling to keep up to figure out how to regulate new industries and transformative new models. Workplaces and workers are struggling to keep up to figure out what this means. Parents are struggling to figure out how to be a parent in the age of cyberbullying and trying to keep your kid off of the screen, right? We know this from our day-to-day life. The interesting thing about engineering in particular is engineers, more so than any other group, are the ones accelerating this bus. So I think it would be a great irony if engineers who are accelerating the bus let it run away from us, right? As opposed to keeping up with it and playing a role in helping to steer it. So a 21st century challenge in this bigger frame. How can society become as good at shaping the positive impacts of technologies as we are at inventing them? Will we keep up with the bus? Will we steer the bus with intention as a broad society? Now, so this has all been at the frame level, and now just the last couple slides, we're going to bring it back to the provocation around engineering. So what does all this mean for engineering? If you accept this frame, or if you're willing to work with this frame for a bit and kind of see where it takes you, what does this mean for engineering? So it's clear that engineers can't solve this problem alone. This is a societal problem that's much bigger than engineering. And I would propose that in Canada, we have a huge amount of human capital, and we have the raw material, but I would also propose that it's not currently organized like this image right now to actually tackle this big challenge of our time. So that's an important thing for us to sort of notice. So as much as it can't be solved by engineers alone, I would propose that it can't be solved without engineers. So engineers as the people most associated with the creation, application, and perfection of technology, we have a natural role, I would propose, in helping to solve this challenge of how we're going to shape this relationship with technology and society. I think in the past industrial revolutions, maybe things moved slow enough that we could kind of play, sort of a little bit more kind of closed off role. But I think a lot of these signs are pointing to a quickening and a complexity that's making sort of fundamental shifts within the larger frame. So that's what I wanted to share with you coming from the lab. The lab is like building off of this and thinking about implications, and it's a platform for kind of fleshing this out and bringing other kind of frames and lenses to things. But this is the one that I felt would be most relevant to share with you as we go back to this question again. So now you're going to get another chance. We'll give you a little bit shorter for the individual reflection now, and then we'll give you another round of small group discussion. And this time afterwards, we're going to spend a little bit of time bubbling things up to the overall group after we've had the small group discussion. So a minute and a bit of quiet reflection, and then we'll give you the signal to go back to your groups. All right. Sorry again to cut you off. Again, I hope you're frustrated, but unfortunately, that's part of engaging in fun questions like this. It's clear that no one had anything to say on this topic, but what I'd love to do now is just open it up to some whole group sharing. And so what I'd ask is, if you had something you want to share, put up your hand, and I'll sort of call on people. And if I could ask you to sort of boil down something that stood out to you, or a question this brought up for you, something that stood out, or a question that this kind of raised for you. if you could share that as succinctly as possible. And what I'll do is, if it's going a little bit long, I'll put up my hand first, and I'm going to ask for permission, or I'm going to take permission to actually cut people off a bit, because I want to make sure there's so much wisdom in this room. We want to get comments kind of coming up a little. There we go. But just to quickly kind of note in these comments, we heard about this. Hey, this is what engineers have always done, but it's transforming. And we've heard, this kind of how we're conceptualizing the roles and responsibilities of engineers. I love the three-word kind of provocations. And we ask big, tough questions, like the group that's saying maybe engineering doesn't need to exist in this way. Like to have the courage and boldness to ask questions like that, within these big frames, right? So, so much wisdom and knowledge in the room, and this pains me to do this, but we're gonna go through just another short, even shorter kind of bit of sharing, and then we're gonna go take it a little bit more from the whole into the drill. What does this mean for engineering education?
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm just going to set you up to start thinking about the next question, which is the shift in engineering education that's going to have to occur. So I want to provide a few ideas, a bit of context of things that have gone on since the Engineer 2020 to bring us up to speed as to where we are now, so you can think a bit more about the future. So one of them, which has really been key to the changes that we're seeing at the moment, is in Canada we've developed these graduate attributes. Based on what's going on in the conference, we are seeing that many of us are starting to really be able to find the teaching tools to bring these to life. What we need to think about is, as we move forward, how may these competencies evolve, how may the balance between them evolve, how may they change? So that's one piece of context. A second is there's been a number of reports that have come up with different vision exercises as to how things may change in the future. Discipline-based research, education research, change in undergraduate science and engineering. You may have seen this as 2012 National Academy of Science. Basically, some of the key takeaways from this is a very detailed literature survey since this, and they're saying we have lots of evidence about what makes for effective teaching and learning. We know it's not necessarily what's going on in our classrooms at the moment. We also know it's not the evidence that's motivating a shift within our programs, that there's an inertia there, that we're having problems overcome. It's not that evidence alone is going to be able to cause the way we teach to change drastically. Second one is the Dodge report, Some Assembly Required, and this is looking at the link between STEM education and Canadian prosperity. And Kim was part of this, so if you've got questions, anything you don't like about this report, you can ask him. But really, there's a lot of incredibly useful statistics from a Canadian perspective on this, and some of the takeaways for me were that we can't possibly define the skill set that is going to be needed for the future, but we do know that the STEM type knowledge is going to be required for a whole range of jobs, and that they're central to a variety of changes that may occur. So we're not trying to predict the future, but we are trying to set our students up. The other one I really love is that STEM skills are necessary but not sufficient for innovation and productivity growth. Really what's saying there is that other skills such as leadership, creativity, adaptability, entrepreneurability are required to leverage to maximize the impact. So that's a thought that goes on in this very one. And then the whole new engineer, the big beacon, which is Olin College, is one of the ones that we heard about from Debbie. Very much the idea of a complete radical transformation on how we teach and what we teach. And they came up with 12 characteristics for the engineer and 12 characteristics for what the education system should look like. There's other visioning exercises. A very recent one from the Netherlands, from Delft University, in terms of radical change in the curriculum as well. And there's more coming out. So those are just resources that you can look at. The third thing that is afoot is the idea that we have online technology taking hold. So educational technology is becoming a big factor. In just the last few years, we've seen the advent of MOOCs, SPOCs, small private online courses, e-text. Educational technology is becoming big in the big companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft. Last year, they invested about $3.1 billion in terms of educational technologies. The global market is booming, apparently growing at 24% a year, expected to be at about $340 billion by 2020. And that contrasts to what the size of post-secondary education is, and the idea that in the US, Education's worth about $3 trillion now. If a company can save some of that money, it creates a huge economic incentive that will either enhance, detract, or replace what we're doing here. And that's occurring very, very quickly as well. So just want to put those ideas out there and let you think about what are the top 3 shifts that will be required of engineering education in 2050. What I'd ask you to do is write on the sheet of paper, and then in about 10 minutes we're going to give you some instructions as to how you can send this in to a Google Doc we have. The URL is there. We'll also ask you, for any of you who could not provide your input on last time, please tweet it. Melissa says that tweeting is really useful. If you want to take a photograph of your sheet, tweet that as well. But that's another way that you can share with each other as the discussion is going on. So we'll give you about 10 minutes now.
As this group is debriefing, if you have a smart device that is connected to the internet, go to this website and input your thoughts. I know that there are some of you in the audience who don't have a smart device or would rather have someone type it in for you, and we have certainly volunteers to assist with this. All of our volunteers are equipped with one of these devices, and if you'd like them to input your thoughts into a common collaborative file, I ask that you raise your hand with a marker. Okay? Raising your hand regularly will enable you to engage in the group discussion. Raising your hand with a marker will signal to the volunteers to come to you and they can type in what your remarks are. Okay? So we'll have a group discussion, and at the same time, individually, if you'd like to submit your thoughts, which I recommend that you do, please either raise your hand with a marker or go to the website. Thanks.
Okay. And I love the idea of starting now. When we came up with this idea of Engineer 2050, we're thinking about it. And for their engineers who are going to have influence in 2050, they're probably going to have gone through our programs in about 2040, 2035, based upon a curriculum that would get phased in 2025, 2030. So it really, given how nimble universities are, it's not that far away. So definitely we do need to think now as well. Those who haven't had a chance to comment, I know there's many of you, please tweet it in. Is tweet a verb? Is that? Okay, so tweet it in. I can pass it on to Chirag, who's going to give us.
So we're going to give you a snapshot of what we're collecting so far. Good news is it works, I bet. It actually crashed our initial system, but now it works, so we're fine. 118 responses so far. The next thing you're going to see on the screen behind me is a word cloud. A word cloud of some of the responses that are coming in. Can you guess what the number 1 word is? Engineer. Let's see if you're right. Very good. So, this is literally a copy and paste of the results coming in with minimal filtering using a log n. So you can see for yourself how some of these things are emerging. The word discipline appears a couple of times, knowledge, 10, humility, 4 times, and so on. Holistic, education, certainly 11, engineer, 27. And you can continue to submit your thoughts, and I'll try to update this in real time. Okay?
Okay, we're going to go to our last step now, which is how do we move forward. We're going to ask you to fill out an evaluation as we go. So thank you for all that input, and we're going to try to continue synthesizing this. So really the question we're going to look at is how should we continue this conversation? What do we want to do as a community? What should the next 2 steps be? And that's the key one, what do you want to contribute? So take a few minutes and discuss this with each other, and we'll do a debrief at the end on that. And we're going to ask you to fill out an evaluation form in the workshop as we go. All right, with that, I would just like to thank my co-facilitators. Let's hear it for Mark. He did a great job. I'd like to thank Chirag for putting together, what is your name now? Third member of our team, Peter, did a great job helping us pull all this together.
And a big thank you to Greg, who has been phenomenal through this whole process. Didn't get thanked by Lisa this morning. Oh, that's great. Well, no. Oh, regular face.